Greetings, heroes. It is I, your friendly neighborhood rabbi, John Carrier, and I'm here today with great humility. I'm supposed to be on a little bit earlier today, but something came up. Couldn't notify people in time, but I apologize if you were here earlier and missed me. Here I am talking about Parashat Kedoshim, the Torah portion of this week. Today is Friday. It's 4:30 in the afternoon Pacific, so Shabbat is coming up on us pretty quickly. My wife is out shopping for food for Shabbat dinner tonight. We're having some great friends over, going to be cooking for them, but I didn't want to miss this opportunity to talk about the Torah portion of this week, Parashat Kedoshim. It means holy ones, right? And in the beginning of this parasha, God says, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." Right? And it just says you're going to be a holy people. Why? Because I am holy. I, your God, am holy. And then it gives a bunch of stuff. It gives a bunch of rules and things like that we say. And just want to acknowledge some people who've joined us already. Kathy is here. Michael is here. And if y'all were here earlier, I deeply apologize for not being here earlier, but I am glad to see you. Can everybody see me okay? Kathy says, my brother lives in Colorado. Michael's here from Colorado. Very happy to have you here. I'm very embarrassed. I was going to be on at 2 o'clock today, but it's 4 o'clock right now, 4:30 right now. But here we go. Just didn't want to miss the opportunity to learn some Torah with you. So if you're here to learn about the Torah portion of the week, Parashat Kedoshim, here we are. There is one particular passage in this parasha that I wanted to make sure we hit on this week before we go into Shabbat. And it's hard because there's so many great things here in this parsha. Again, it says, I'm your God, I'm holy, you're going to be a holy people. And it gives us things like judge people fairly. Don't be biased in your judgment, whether someone is rich or poor. Don't throw a stumbling block in front of a blind person. Don't stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. It gives us so many different ways to be holy, but the one that really hits home to me, and I don't know whether it's because of my personal history or because of what I observe in the world. It's just a coincidence. I was teaching a class about the high holidays in the last couple of weeks, and the high holidays, the key message, and I know we're far from the high holidays, but the key message of the high holidays is about asking for forgiveness, and also the flip side of that, granting forgiveness and not holding grudges. And this is always a hard thing to teach because I always get questions from people. Well, what if somebody asked me for forgiveness, and I don't feel like forgiving them, or I don't think that forgiving them is right. I don't feel like they'll learn their lesson if I forgive them. And how do I forgive someone who did something wrong and they are not, let's say, fully cognizant of that, or repentant, or feeling that remorse, or they're not asking me for forgiveness in the way I think they should in order to grant it? And how do I let go of that? And is it fair to let go of that? And I always struggle with this because I know, like, I want to teach people, okay, you should ask for forgiveness. You should readily grant forgiveness. This is what Maimonides tells us. You know, if you ask for forgiveness 3 times, 4 times, and someone says, no, I don't forgive you, then that's on them. That's not about you. You did everything you could, and for someone to not forgive you is cruel, or holding that grudge is an act of cruelty, and yet we do it all the time. We hold on to those grudges, especially when we don't feel like people have come to us sincerely and made atonement and asked for forgiveness. And I don't know, maybe it's sticking with me because I'm the kind of person, I have a long memory. There's a mission about this that basically says you should have a long fuse and a short memory. And I know about myself, and you may not know this about me, but my wife does, and my best friends do. I'm the opposite of that. I have a short fuse and a long memory. And it says in this Mishnah that that is a rasha, so I'll own it. Perhaps I'm a rasha. Like when I get upset easily, and I may be quick to forgive, but I'm very slow to forget. I'll say it that way. So this always hits me personally when we read this in Parashat Kedoshim, which is like one of my favorite parshiot. Especially compared to Achrimot when it's talking about sexual impropriety and blood taboos and things like that. We get to this section where God is saying, I will teach you how to be holy. And here's how. And my favorite / least favorite verses are 17 and 18, which say, do not hate your brother. And I guess that extends to sisters as well. Do not hate your brother in your heart. Reprove your brother, but don't bear sin on his account. And that's verse 17. And verse 18 says, you shouldn't carry a grudge against a compatriot. You shouldn't carry a grudge against somebody in your community. You should love somebody in your community like you love yourself. And the commentator from medieval times, Ibn Ezra, says, like, this is two sides of the same coin. Do not hate as a let's say a negative commandment, a lo taseh, like do not hate your brother. And then it says in the positive at the end of 18, you should love your neighbor like you love yourself. So do not hate, but do love. And this really focuses our attention on what's in between those two negative and positive statements of the same sentiment. Reprove them. Don't bear their sin. Don't sin on their behalf. And don't carry a grudge. And like I said before, I am a person who carries grudges. I'm just going to admit that. Like, I'm not going to BS you. I missed our session earlier, so I owe a little bit of honesty and authenticity here. I'm a person who bears grudges. I'm a person who remembers things that people have done to me or that I think they've done to me, whether they did or not. That's just my nature. I have a long memory about things. And so that's why it's always stirring for me to read this thing. Let go of those things. And I heard this beautiful teaching many years ago. I don't know where it's from. I don't know if it's from Torah or from a novel that I read or something else that says, like, imagine the grudges that you bear in your life, the things that you remember, the hurts that you hold on to as a bag of bricks, right? When you carry grudges in your life, it's like walking through your life, with slung over your shoulder, a burlap sack of bricks or rocks or something heavy that you'd rather not be carrying, but you feel like you have to, and you're walking through life like that. What would it feel like to let that bag go? Like, what would it feel like in your arms that have been carrying that bag? What would it feel like in your legs that bear the whole weight of your body and that grudge? What would it feel like to let that heavy weight, that heavy burden go? And furthermore, who are you carrying that weight for? Are you carrying it for yourself? Does it really serve you to carry that heavy weight? That you think you're doing yourself a favor to carry this burden through life? Are you carrying it for them? Really? Somebody who hurt you, you're going to bear a heavy weight on their behalf? Are you carrying it for a sense of justice or fairness in the world? That you think that the world is more just, that you bear the weight of what somebody else did? And, along with this noble sentiment, a trite bit of prose or a saying that is often shared, when you carry a grudge against another person, it's like drinking poison, hoping that the other person will get sick, right? When you carry a grudge, you are holding on to this thing that actually makes you ill, that actually makes you sad or anxious or angry, but you take it in because you think by holding on to it or taking it in, the other person will be hurt somehow. And guess what? They almost never are. The only one who's suffering is you. And so to teach us this lesson, what does it mean to not hate your brother? What does it mean to love another person as yourself? It really means to face up to the reality of the pain, reprove them, but don't carry that sin for them, and don't carry that grudge. And so that's the teaching of this week that's most poignant for me. Of all the beautiful things that are in Parashat Kedoshim, of all the ways that it calls us to do justice in the world, to not be biased for the rich or for the poor, to not insult a deaf person. That's my favorite. That's my second or third favorite verse in all this. It says, "Don't insult a deaf person." And the jokey guy in me, or the cynic in me, says, "Well, like, why does it matter if you insult a deaf person? They can't hear you." But that comes to teach us that when you insult another person, whether they can hear you or not, that's wrong, because you might be diminishing their dignity in front of the people who can hear you. But insulting someone doesn't just hurt them, it hurts you. Don't throw a stumbling block in front of a blind person, right? Don't create bad situations for people who can't avoid them. And above all, do not stand idly by the blood of your neighbor. If somebody else is hurting, even if it doesn't affect you necessarily, justice requires that you stand there and you look at that blood and you show it to other people. But the lesson for me, most poignantly, and the one that I want to get across this year in studying Parashat Kedoshim, is that we don't need to define our identity by our pain. We don't need to say to the world, and this was a teaching of Rabbi Jonathan Sachs recently over Pesach. He shared this teaching. In identity politics, we tend to define ourselves by our pain. We say, I have a grievance, therefore I have an identity. And we go on Twitter or Facebook or what have you and rail against the injustice of the world, which, we should. But we define ourselves by those things which we are offended by. But instead of saying, I am offended, and shouting to the world why I'm offended, what would it be like if we went to the people who we think hurt us and said, in private, you hurt me when you did that? Right? It's not about a public shaming. It's not about shouting to the world how evil the world is or how evil this other person is. Not talking to them, but talking to everybody. What would it be like if we went to that person and said, you hurt me when you did this? And further, what would it be like to say, you hurt me when you did this, and I forgive you? A couple of years ago, I was learning with a person, Abby Pfeiffer Mandel, who's a professor at University of Southern California in leadership and creative thinking and things like that. And she said that a couple of things that we as Americans, and this probably extends broader than that, a couple of things that we have a hard time saying is, I'm sorry and I forgive you, right? Owning what we did, but also letting go of those grudges. And so my blessing for you this coming Shabbat is that you can say to people that you hold those grudges against, not taking it on to publicly shame them, which almost never changes anybody, by the way. And having the courage, having the strength, and I'm not saying it's easy, but having the courage to say, you hurt me when you did this, and I forgive you. This law of tochacha, this mitzvah of rebuke, this thing that Leviticus chapter 19, verse 17 is telling us to do. If you see something, say something. Right? Don't hold that grudge. Don't hate your neighbor in your heart, but shout it out loud. What you did hurt me. Doesn't mean embarrassing them in public. In fact, the next part of the verse where it says, don't hate your neighbor in your heart, rebuke them and do not bear their sin yourself. Some people would say if you don't correct people, you are now responsible for the bad things that they do. But Rashi takes it very differently. And I think Ibn Ezra echoes this in the Talmud as well. And they say, on the one hand, it says, rebuke them and do not bear their sin. Some people could say that means tell people what they're doing wrong so that you are not responsible for further wrongdoing. But what Rashi says, commentator from the medieval period, what is now France, he lived there, made wine, cool dude. He said, tell them what they did wrong and do not bear sin on account of them, means tell them what they did wrong in a way that doesn't humiliate them. That's the sin that it says that they're talking about when they say do not bear sin on account of them. It's not don't be responsible for what they did wrong. It's don't create another sin of public humiliation when you reprove them. So I'll ask you, whatever grudges you're holding on to, what would it be like if you said to another person, you hurt me when you did this, and I forgive you? And maybe that's the start of a longer conversation with you and that person. Maybe that's the final words before you walk away for the last time. It's okay to tell people what they did that hurt you. Can you do it in private? Can you do it in a way that they're more likely to receive and accept and actually change? And in any case, whether they accept it or not, can you say, I'm no longer going to carry this weight. I'm no longer going to carry this bag of bricks. Who am I carrying this weight for? And let it go. And walk away. No longer giving them that real estate in your consciousness. And I think that's the path to being able to fulfill the end of verse 18 in this account. Love your neighbor as yourself. You can only fully love someone if you can fully forgive someone. And that goes for yourself as much as anybody else. Many people look at this verse, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, first it requires that you love yourself, which for some folks is a tall order. Right? For some folks, it's actually very hard to accept themselves and love themselves. And you have to be able to do that first before you can love anybody else. You have to let go of your grudges against yourself even. What would it feel like to say to yourself, you hurt me when you did this, and I forgive you? And once you can do that about your own actions, then extend that love to your brother, your sister, your parents, your children, people at work, people in your community. What would it be like to say to the people who hurt you, you hurt me when you did this, and I forgive you? For me, that is the essence of being a holy person. For me, that's the essence of answering the call to be holy because our God is holy. Our God whom we have probably offended to no end through our mistakes, intentional or otherwise, and yet forgives us and loves us unconditionally. That's what I wanted to pass on this week. I wanted to just acknowledge the people who've showed up for this chat today. Really happy to see my friends. Kathy from California, Michael from Colorado. Ruthie is here from California. Courtney, nice to see you. Val, welcome. Very nice to see you, Val. Curtis, good to see you, Curtis. Kathy says, it's pretty easy for me to forgive others, but not so easy to ask for forgiveness. I'm a little torn because sometimes I don't know whether it's easy, whether it's easier to ask for forgiveness or to give it. Or I should say this differently, whether it's harder to ask for forgiveness or to grant it. The other night in my Intro to Judaism class, we were talking about the high holidays, we're talking about tshuva, we're talking about asking for forgiveness. And I said, what is harder, asking for forgiveness or granting it? And people on both sides, but I'll say the majority said it's harder to grant forgiveness than it is to ask for it. And I'm not gonna argue with that Democratic vote. I'll say small d. I won't get political here. I'm glad to see Miriam here from New Hampshire. She says, how many times do you have to ask for forgiveness on Yom Kippur if the person won't respond? I heard 3, but then you're not responsible if they forgive you. I think it's actually technically 4, in the sense that when you, at least if you follow what Maimonides says, he says you should ask for forgiveness, and not just saying, please forgive me, but actually try to make amends with a person whom you've hurt. And if they reject you, you should come back with other people, with 3 people. Somebody says, witnesses, or just make it a public apology. And you should do that 3 times. And if after 1 private apology and 3 public apologies with a sincere attempt to make amends, then you are yotze. You are no longer responsible. You've done the best that you can. So I'll say technically it's 4 times. 1 private, 3 public, and then you're good, as long as it's sincere. Good to see Carmen here. Really glad to see you here. Daniel Golota, shalom. Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a fabulous day. Let's see who else is here. Milo, always great to see you. Milo from Denmark. Really glad you could join us. And let's see. Michael Pacheco says, this reminds me of Parsha Mitzora, where running your mouth can get you leprosy. Thank you. Rabbi, any tips for folks who tend to catch themselves talking smack? I'll say mazel tov for catching yourself. In the sense that if you catch yourself talking smack, first off, yashikoach, like good job for catching yourself, because many people do this and don't catch themselves and don't think that there's anything wrong with it at all. The first step is, and I don't know if this is goes to whether it's Maimonides on tshuva or it's 12 steps or what have you. The first thing is understanding that you have a problem. Like the first thing is understanding that you talk smack. I think for me, the essence of catching yourself and correcting your behavior is realizing that that other person that you're talking about is just as beloved by God as you are, is just as created in the image of God as you are, right? And you may have your beef, and that beef may be legitimate, right? There could be something between you two that person did to you that they're wrong and you're right. Doesn't matter. Right. If you're talking about that person and you realize that, okay, maybe I shouldn't be, just realize that they love their family as much as you love their family, and their family loves them as much as your family loves you. And saying, okay, I'm just going to not talk about another person right now. I'll talk about the Red Sox. I'll talk about the Dodgers. I'll talk about something else, the weather, the traffic on the 405. But I'm not going to talk in a way that belittles another human being. There's this great teaching from Rabbi Brad Artson, who looks at a Mishnah and it tells us that the mark of a scholar is to not engage in small talk. And in one sense, when you think of small talk, you think about traffic, you think about the weather, you think about sports or something like that. Like when it says don't engage in small talk, but he has a different interpretation, which I love. Because I like small talk. I like just chatting with people, and this happens all the time. But he says, when the rabbis say small talk, they mean don't engage in talk that makes other people small. Don't engage in gossip that diminishes others in order to elevate yourself or to elevate some other thing. And so when you catch yourself, first off, that's the hardest thing to do, is catching yourself that you're doing this. And if you do, kol hakavod, good on you. And just remember, like, okay, how can I change the subject? How can I talk about things that are important to me without hurting another person, without making another person seem small, right? I'll not a rabbi yet, but I'll quote Gary Vaynerchuk. Like, there's a difference between having, when you have the tallest building in town, it's about building the tallest building, not tearing down other people's buildings, right? If you can create something of value, if you can grow, if you can really build yourself up or build somebody else up rather than make yourself big by comparison to others you tear down, that is the essence of real, authentic growth. Let's see who else is here. Really grateful to see people show up. Drake, nice to see you. Courtney, Miriam, everybody, thanks for being here. Miriam says, so if you tell them that you forgive them, they're not obligated to ask on Yom Kippur. Nope. Don't mistake that. People are always liable to ask for forgiveness on Yom Kippur, at least according to Maimonides. What Maimonides says is, fasting and making atonement and afflicting yourself and praying on Yom Kippur is good for sins between a person and God. And if you fast, if you afflict yourself, if you pray, God will forgive you. But if you did something to somebody else and you haven't made atonement with that person, God will not forgive you until that other person does, right? So, if you tell them that you forgive them, they still have to go through Yom Kippur if they're a Jewish person. Like, not everybody has to do Yom Kippur. Jewish people do. But if you forgive them, maybe God doesn't automatically forgive them, but God will not forgive them until you do. And so I think it's a mitzvah, just like it's a mitzvah to ask for forgiveness, it's also a mitzvah to forgive somebody. I call somebody who forgives a shaliach mitzvah, meaning an agent of mitzvah, in the sense that if, like, somebody gives you $1 to put in the tzedakah box, you are then an agent of their mitzvah. You're doing that mitzvah, and then it helps them too. If somebody asks you for forgiveness and you forgive them, you are an agent, you are a helper in the mitzvah that you're doing, or in the mitzvah that they're doing, excuse me. So I say be quick to forgive, not just because it lets go of that grudge that you're carrying, it also helps them do a mitzvah, right? You're helping them grow. You're helping them be a better person. You're also teaching them that forgiveness is possible. You're teaching them that tshuva is possible. When you forgive somebody, you're not only doing the mitzvah for forgiveness, but you're also doing the mitzvah of helping another person do their mitzvah of asking for forgiveness. And then by doing that, you're teaching them that asking for forgiveness is a good thing because redemption is possible. So I really appreciate everybody learning with me today. Again, it's a little bit later in the day than I thought they would. And if you're watching this later, you don't care. So I won't go on too much about this. But I really encourage everyone to take a look at this week's Torah portion, the book of Leviticus, or Sefer Vayikra, especially 19. 19 I don't pick a lot of favorite chapters of the Torah, but 19 is of the book of Leviticus is one of the best. So I encourage everybody to read through this, look at all the different ways in which God guides us to be a holy people, and see which of these things are hard for you, which of these things are easy for you that you could pick them up and do them right away, and which of these things you think, well, it might take a little work, but I think I can do it this year. And so, if nothing else, I want to invite you to think about this coming Shabbat, the people who you keep in your mind as people who have hurt you. What would it be like to say to them in private, or maybe just to yourself if you don't have contact with them anymore, you hurt me when you did this, and I forgive you. I'm letting go of that pain. And it doesn't mean I agree with what you did or accept what you did, It means that I no longer have to bear the burden of what you did. You hurt me when you did this, and I forgive you. And that's the crux of what I want to teach you this week. Thank you, everybody, for learning with me in this particular video and other videos that we've learned together this week. I really appreciate you, and I wish you a Sabbath of peace, a Shabbat Shalom. And until next time, heroes, peace.